You are about to be born. Not today, not in a hospital, not under fluorescent lights with a team of masked strangers and machines monitoring every heartbeat. 100,000 years ago. On the ground, in the dark, in a world with no painkillers, no surgical tools, no blood transfusions, and no way to call for help. And yet here you are. You exist. Which means at least one woman in your direct ancestral line survived exactly that. Probably dozens of them, maybe hundreds. This is the story of what childbirth actually looked like for the vast majority of human history. It is not a comfortable story, but it is one of the most remarkable stories your species has ever lived through. Let us start with the most basic biological fact that most people never learn. Human childbirth is, by almost any measure, the most difficult and dangerous birth process of any primate on Earth. A chimpanzee infant slides out of the birth canal facing forward, in roughly the direction the mother is facing. The mother can reach down, guide the infant out, and hold it immediately. The whole process, while painful, is relatively straightforward. Human birth is completely different, because our brains grew so large so fast. A process anthropologist Leslie Aiello described as our species making an extraordinary evolutionary gamble. The human skull became almost too large to pass through the female pelvis. Almost, but not quite. What evolution produced as a compromise was a birth canal that forces the infant to rotate, to turn its head sideways, to navigate a narrow, bony passage that leaves almost no margin for error. The infant exits facing away from the mother. She cannot reach down and guide it out without risking injury to its neck. She cannot see what is happening. She needs help. This is not a modern invention. Anthropologist Wenda Trevathan at New Mexico State University has argued for decades that assisted birth with at least one other person present, is one of the oldest human behaviors we have. Older than language. Older than fire-making. She published her landmark argument in her 1987 book Human Birth, and the evidence has only grown stronger since. Your ancestors did not give birth alone. They never did. So who was in the room? And what did that room look like? For most of human prehistory, there was no room. There was a clearing, a cave, a shallow depression in the earth lined with leaves and grass. Somewhere sheltered from wind and predators, somewhere the laboring woman could move. Because movement was not just allowed in prehistoric birth, it was the method, standing, squatting, kneeling on all fours. These were the default positions for hundreds of thousands of years. The horizontal lying on your back position that most modern hospitals use was largely popularized in 17th century France, reportedly because King Louis XIV of France wanted to watch his mistresses give birth more easily. Before that, across almost every culture on Earth, women gave birth upright. The physics are not complicated. Gravity assists when you are upright. The pelvis opens slightly wider in a squat than when lying flat. The infant has a shorter distance to travel. Upright birth, while exhausting, works with the body rather than against it. Around the laboring woman were other women, older women, women who had done this before, women who had watched their own mothers do it. This transmission of knowledge, passed body to body, generation to generation, without writing, without formal training, is one of the most underappreciated information systems in all of human history. Archaeologist and anthropologist Karen Rosenberg at the University of Delaware has written extensively about what she calls the midwifery hypothesis, the idea that the need for assisted birth drove the development of social bonds, cooperation, and community in early Homo sapiens in ways that no other primate required. Birth, in other words, may have been one of the engines that made us social. The woman attending the birth was not a passive bystander. She would have applied pressure. She would have known how to reposition an infant whose descent had stalled. She would have known which plants reduced bleeding, which roots eased cramping, which postures helped. This was empirical knowledge, built over thousands of individual births, accumulated over generations. Now let us talk about the part that no one wants to say out loud. People died. Frequently. Both mothers and infants. Anthropological estimates of prehistoric maternal mortality vary widely, but most researchers working from skeletal evidence and comparative ethnographic data suggest that somewhere between 1 in 20 and 1 in 10 births resulted in the death of the mother. The leading causes were hemorrhage, obstructed labor, and infection. Obstructed labor, when the infant's head is simply too large to pass, was likely the single most catastrophic complication. There was no cesarean section, there were no forceps, there was only the knowledge, the hands, and the limits of what a human body could endure. Infant mortality was even higher. Evidence from prehistoric burial sites, including the extraordinarily detailed demographic analysis of the Neolithic cemetery at Oederhofen-Oudmühle in Bavaria, suggests that anywhere from 30 to 50% of infants did not survive their first year. A significant portion of those deaths occurred at or shortly after birth. This is not ancient human failure. This is ancient human reality. And it makes what your ancestors built around birth, the community, the knowledge, the ritual, all the more extraordinary, because they did not face this alone, and they did not face it without preparation. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, one of the richest prehistoric archaeological sites ever excavated, researchers have found evidence of ochre, red iron oxide pigment, being processed and used as far back as 100,000 years ago. Many anthropologists believe ochre was used in birth rituals, applied to the body of the laboring woman, or used to mark the event. Red has been associated with birth and blood in human symbolic systems on every continent, across every culture. For as far back as the symbolic record reaches, your ancestors understood what was happening. They marked it. They treated it as sacred. The infant, if it survived, entered a world that was immediately warm and loud. Not with machines or voices of strangers, but with the breathing and heartbeat of bodies it already knew. The laboring woman would have been surrounded by people she had lived beside. For years, the infant's first sounds were the sounds of the tribe, and then came nursing. The anthropological record here is remarkably consistent. Hunter-gatherer infants were nursed, on demand, for anywhere from 2 to 4 years, sometimes longer. Paleoanthropologist Christopher Kuzawa at Northwestern University has shown through isotopic analysis of ancient teeth that extended nursing was essentially universal in prehistoric human populations. This was not sentiment. This was survival technology. Breast milk in the prehistoric environment provided immunological protection that infants had no other source for. Extended nursing also naturally suppressed ovulation, spacing births roughly 3 to 4 years apart. In a world where each pregnancy and birth carried real mortality risk, this biological spacing was, almost certainly, a survival advantage for both mothers and children. So let us reconstruct the night. It is somewhere on the East African savanna. 100,000 years ago, the dry season is ending. A woman in her early 20s, already a mother once before, her first child walking now and sleeping nearby, has been in labor since morning. It is now late afternoon. She is squatting, supported from behind by an older woman whose hands she knows, whose voice she knows. 2 other women are present. One tends a small fire. One holds water in a carved gourd. The older woman speaks quietly, steadily, the same phrases she has used at 100 births before this one. There is pain, real pain, pain that has no pharmaceutical answer, pain that has only endurance, and breath, and the pressure of known hands on her back. And then, the infant arrives. It is small, it is covered in white vernix, a waxy coating that protected it in the womb. It does not cry immediately, and in that silence, everyone holds their breath. Then the cry comes. The women exhale, the fire crackles. Somewhere nearby, the first child stirs in sleep and does not wake. The mother holds the infant to her chest. The infant, whose brain is still largely unformed and will continue developing for the next 2 years outside the womb, a process neuroscientist Alison Gopnik at UC Berkeley has called the most extraordinary postnatal brain development of any species on Earth, turns its head toward the warmth. It already knows her heartbeat. It has known it for 9 months. It is, in the most ancient sense of the word, home. You were born into a hospital room you will never remember. Machines tracked your entry into the world. Strangers in gloves guided you out. Mother had options your ancestors could not have imagined, and she survived in ways that were not guaranteed for most of human history. But the first thing you did, before language, before sight fully developed, before you understood a single thing about the world, was turn toward warmth. Turn toward the sound you already knew. 100,000 years ago, in a different landscape, in a different body, under a different sky, another version of the first moment of your life looked almost exactly the same. You turned toward the warmth, and someone was already there, waiting.